And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 114. Today we're going to be looking at adjusting your face in Photoshop, or adjusting a face. It doesn't have to be yours, although I will be using mine for the examples here. I'm going to be looking at a particular aspect of Photoshop known as neural filters, and with the use of sliders you can do various changes to your face. You can, as well as putting on smiles or scowls, you can even age or youngen your face as well. As well as that, I think I'm going to do a little bit on other ways you can kind of adjust faces in Photoshop as well. So that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. We're here live on YouTube. If you're here, leave a comment. Let me know where you're from, what the weather's like, what's generally speaking how life is where you are. And as the podcast goes on, I'll be checking in on the chat. So if you also have any questions or comments, then do keep lost sense of what I'm trying to say here. Let's chat. So yes, here I am, live on YouTube. You can tell it is live, otherwise I'll be cropping all this bit out. Right, I can see we have a few comments in already. So Jackie says, hello, Jackie here from a very rainy South Africa. Karen says, from West Yorkshire, says we have got a little rain, some sunshine, occasionally breaking through, then some rain. Yay, it's summer. Meg says hello everyone. Robert from Texas says howdy all. Stacey says good morning, happy 4th of July weekend. Warm to hot week and cloudy morning here in Hatfield, Pennsylvania. May Britt says it's a windy Copenhagen. And Pat now says, oh, just caught napping, awake now. And horse video, oh, that's Diane. Diane says hello everyone, watching watching the Silverstone Grand Prix at the same time. Right, okay, so you're not one of those watching the tennis at the same time, because I know Meg downstairs is also watching the tennis. So anybody who's here who's, yeah, okay, so maybe a part watching something else, you could always watch it on catch up. Be here live now, don't miss the live experience. Right. Okay, so we've got a few people in, and not everybody has decided to watch the racing or the or the tennis. So, okay, what are we going to talk about today? Then I want to talk about the idea. I'm going to introduce you to the idea of neural filters. Now, where this goes for a little change on most things with up until now, up until fairly recently, Photoshop, you've got all these hundreds of little tools, and I'm going to show you some of them where you can sort of play around and you can make eyes bigger and you can soften skin and you can stretch earlobes and you can do all sorts of bits and pieces. The idea with the neural filters, though, is that they've got different kinds that they're trialing out, and when you move your slider, they're making kind of intelligent adjustments. But the thing is that it's not done on your computer. What happens is you move the slider in Photoshop and then it accesses through the cloud. It goes to kind of Photoshop HQ as such, and the computing power there matches up your face, makes the adjustments, and then sends the results back down your line. Now, the problem with this, of course, is the fact that if you're using a big file, the point between you move the slider and the effect happens can take quite a long time. And then if you kind of go a bit too far and you just want to come back a bit or back a bit, then it takes a long time to kind of redoing. However, if you either are working on a very small picture or you are you've got a really good internet connection, then it allows essentially more computing power in a way, because the amount of computing power that's going on to do these things is kind of too big for most people's computers or laptops or tablets or something like that. So it's a way of tapping into the sheer computing power of Photoshop itself, like, the whole organization and their big computers that they use, rather than just the one that you've got on your desktop. So what I want to do then is show you some examples. Oh, I see Rosemary's here, says good morning, so good to be back. Missed you last week, Rosemary. Hope everything is fine with you. Okay, so let me then flip through. Now what I did was I'm going to show you here. Let's flip over to here and kind of show you what we're up to with neural filters. So let me just move this here. This is kind of one I've already set up. So I played around a little bit with a couple of different photos, and in the end, actually, this one that I took of myself about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, I look so much younger there. I feel so much younger there. I feel I've aged so much in the last 4 years. But anyway, this photo that I took 4 years ago seemed like a fairly good one. It's a neutral, it's fairly straightforward. So it's a good one to kind of play around with and show you what's involved. What I've also done with this particular version that I've got on the screen is I've done a smaller web size sort of version of it. So being a small file, hopefully it shouldn't take too much power to move when I move the slide. It shouldn't take too long between one section and the other. The other thing I was slightly wary of was because, of course, this podcast is all streaming down live through my router and everything, that if I use too much, if I used a big file with this, that I might end up kind of, if not crashing, at least putting too much strain on my internet connection. So what we've got here then, I'll tell you what, let's just move in a little bit more so you can really see what's going on. So here we go. I've put the picture up and I've clicked over in here. There's a whole bunch of different things here, from skin smoothing and super zoom and makeup transfer. I'm not going to go into all these today, but really what I'm just trying to do is introduce you to the idea of what this can do. And what I've chosen to download is Smart Portrait. And what Smart Portrait does is it gives us a bunch of features. Over here, for example, it says be happy. So if I take this slider and move it slightly to the right, there, see, it decides what my happy face ought to be like. And then if I stretch that right over there, that's as far as it goes. Not only is it giving me a smile, it's giving me teeth. And I have to say, it's giving me better quality teeth than I actually have. So, are you convinced? I think it works. Sometimes these kind of things work slightly better with some faces than others. However, it does kind of give you a sense. I mean, there's a little bit here which reminds me of camera face, where people are told to smile for the camera and the mouth goes up, but the eyes don't. And because the eyes aren't really smiling as much, I feel slightly less convinced. Equally, you can take this and you can go backwards. So that's back to not, and I can go down to the not be happy. So a little bit of a scowl there. It has kind of tightened my lips and drawn things down a bit and kind of furrowed the brows just a little bit more. So if I put that back to 0, then there we go. We've gone back to this is my neutral face again. Now, other things they can do, they've got hair thickness, which is quite strange. And I'm really noticing the fact that even though this is only 4 years old, I have a little bit more hair on top there. You know, I have got thinner as the time has gone on. But if I take this hair thickness and I drag that to the left, that's really making me bald. That's kind of, I suppose, what I can imagine that I might be looking like in another 4 or 5 years. Or I can drag it right over to the other side and it can add hair to me. So wig days, I think. That looks like a really bad wig. Quite fun, quite fun. But I suppose what you can also do is if I add these together and I do the hair thickness, I'll come on to facial age in a moment. Let's put that on 0. Come back. Let's just one at a time. Let's do this. So facial age, yes, this is what now. If I decide to go younger, it's giving me thicker hair. It's soft and darker hair as well. Smoothing my skin very slightly, I think, as well. So in this one, I have to say, I notice I start to look a little bit more like my son, Rogan. This is certainly a little bit odd. Alternatively, we can age me in the other direction. I drag this right over to the right, and now we have, I look less like my dad and more like my big brother. In this one, I think. But you can see that what's happened here is, you know, as well as going grey, is added a few more wrinkles and lines to my face as well. And so what I can then do, let's take the hair thickness down, as well as the facial age, and it's going to give me bald and grey and a little bit of line. And so, yeah, it's sort of knocked some of the age off, though, I think. So it's a kind of little Slightly strange, yeah. Oddly enough, when I go slightly less hair, it sort of smooths me out. So it obviously hasn't kind of fully got the idea yet of which way I should be going. So let's put that back to 0 for a moment. Then there's a couple of other really weird ones, and well, strange things like, so it will change your eye direction. So if I go this way, it will make me look to the left. It's also made my eyes blue, which I think is slightly strange because I don't actually have blue eyes. You'll see here they're sort of slightly more grey-green kind of natural colour. If I go over to the right, then it's again sort of slightly blue-eyed my eyes, and looking over to the right. So we can, if we want, we can make me balder, we can make me older, we can make me looking to the left, and maybe we can make me look happy as well. Do I get teeth if I... No, it's not giving me the full teeth thing if I've got other things going on at the same time. So you can see then that there's yeah, take the... Oh, that just looks really creepy. So, yeah, I mean, you can certainly have a bit of fun with this. Now let's take all these back to 0. So here we go, back to the original me. There's extra ones here. There's an extra couple of expressions that it decides to use, which is surprise. So if we drag surprise over, that's apparently what I look like surprised. It's a kind of slightly surprised that I seem to have lost the front tooth as well, I think. I don't quite know where they get that one from, the surprise. But let's move it back over here and go, what's the opposite of surprise? Smug? I'm not entirely sure. Unsurprised. I don't know that overly looks unsurprised. And let's go for anger, because there's an anger here. So what do I look like angry? Ooh, is that what I look like angry? Hang on. Not totally convinced by that one, but you know. And the opposite of anger. Slightly glacial, I think, to be honest. So that then is neural filters. Yeah, it's a kind. Now, like I say, there's all sorts of other ones. There's skin smoothing. There's makeup. There's stuff for landscapes and color transfer and things like that. But really, what I wanted to do was introduce you to this idea of that I can kind of see computing power moving in this direction. That just as we now, I mean, there used to be a time when we downloaded our emails onto our computer, and now all our emails are kept up in the cloud. We go to Gmail or Hotmail or any, whatever these are, you know, whatever mail system you're using, and we tend to go, it's all stored on the cloud. So if our computer crashes, we've not lost it all, to the point whereby nearly all our data on our phones and our tablets these days tends to be stored on the cloud rather than on the device. And it's now sort of getting to the point whereby even the computing power is getting that way. So I kind of see this as where the future is going. So I thought you might find that one interesting. So let me just cancel that and see if we've got a few more comments on that one. Oh, we have a few more. We've got, Karen says, great session, everyone. I don't have Photoshop, so I'll catch up on this my own time. That's okay. Each program has its own versions of it. Right. Oh, Binod says, hi, Kim. Good evening from India. Check your email. I'm afraid I can't check my email right now. If you want to send me an email that you want me to respond to, you need to get, for the podcast, you need to get it sent to me probably a day or two before the podcast, because essentially I'm kind of a bit busy here right now. And Anne says hello. So hello, Anne. Glad you could make it along. Rosemary says, oh, after being without the internet for a week, it's a bit unnerving to think about not being able to access the cloud. Yeah, it is. It's one of those things. It's the, you know, you the advantages and disadvantages of both. The advantages of having all your stuff in the cloud means that if your computer crashes, you haven't lost everything. The disadvantage is if you can't access the internet, you then suddenly can't access all your information. So, yeah, a bit of a dodgy one, that. Okay, So what I also wanted to do then is that's using neural filters. But there are other ways of playing with things as well. So what I wanted to do then was to show you, oh, Vigi's here, says good evening. Glad you could make it, Vigi. So what I want to do now is show you a couple of slightly more traditional ways, just a little bit of fun here with Photoshop. So let's flip back over to here, only this time what I'll do is I'll open a slightly larger version. So this is the same picture, but it's the original, it's the kind of full-on file size. So this means that if I decide to zoom in, we've still got the detail. And essentially here, what I want to talk about is some of the other methods that you can kind of play around with a face. So one of the things that happens is because there's a lot of programs these days, and what they do is they kind of automatically soften your face. And some of them don't do them particularly well. And I find that I keep getting a bit of a shock on social media. I see people putting up photos of themselves and they've used some kind of Youthify filter, which has done it very badly. And essentially what it's to do with is it's to do with the texture of the skin. So let me just rearrange this workspace a little bit there. So, okay. Now, if I zoom in here, you see what I've got is I've got texture in the skin. And one of the things that these kind of quick programs, these quick apps will often do is if I just, I'm going to duplicate this layer for a moment and then I'm going to blur it. So if I go to Gaussian blur, something like that, and kind of just take this, soften the skin. Now, I don't want to have the whole thing, so I will mask that. And then what I can do is I can paint in the blurred bit. But what I don't want to do, it's going to look a bit silly if I blur the hair. That's not really going to work. So what it does is it sort of works out where the skin is. It tends to leave the eye and the eyebrows and the hair and maybe a little bit of nose, tip of the nose, and then it sort of selectively blurs in everything else. And what you end up with is something a little bit like this. Now let's do the neck as well. And by smoothing out the skin, it's supposed to kind of make me look younger. And does it? Well, kind of, sort of, except for the fact that it does look rather unnatural. Maybe if I kind of take it down a little bit, just allow a little bit of texture in, but it still looks rough. It's not really a great way of doing things. But the quick apps, this is essentially what they do. They kind of, there's a smart blur. They kind of works out where the skin is and then it blurs it. So that's working in the opposite direction to the idea of really what you can do is you can bring out the texture, if you like. Now, where with that, the slider which kind of aged the face, part of the problem there was that when it was adding wrinkles, it was sort of adding wrinkles from a different old person. So the lines didn't necessarily go where my lines would naturally fall. If I want to actually really try and age this face, let's face it, this face is 4 years younger than it currently is, than the one I'm using just now. But if I really want to age this, what I really need to do is increase the texture, because the lines, you know, like I have these lines on my forehead, these are just going to get deeper and deeper as time goes on. So if I Control and T here, and I go to filter, let's go to camera raw filter for a moment. And now I'll just take the highlights down a fraction. And then what I can do is if I go to the texture slider and I increase the texture, let's take that highlight off, you can see that what it's doing is let's go in closer so you can get a better sense of what's going on. Let's particularly look around the eye. You can see that it sort of creates a little bit, and then if I go to the clarify tool, that kind of does it even more. Now that deepens the shadows as well, so I might bring the shadows up a bit, take the highlights down a bit, drag the clarify up just a little bit more, maybe up the exposure a little bit, and I've also lost a little bit of the colour, so I'll just knock vibrant saturation just a fraction, something like that. And so now what we can see is it's kind of really aged the skin. Now it's made the hair go a little bit funny as well, so again what I might do is just paint in the skin like this. And you can see what it does is it's aging the face somewhat. So that notion of playing around with the texture. Another thing is, do you remember, for those of you who might remember when we were doing the black and white bit, that you can play with channels. And there's a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And the red channel makes all the reds kind of more pale, and the opposite of the reds dark. And the blue channel does the opposite. So what happens is your shadows and your spots and your wrinkles and things like that tend to sit in the blue channel rather than the red channel. So again, if I zoom in here, if I go red channel, it actually kind of naturally smooths me out a bit. The blue channel seems to pick up much more of these textures. So if I select all, copy that, and then let's go back to here and let's paste that on there. And then what I do is I take this down to luminosity. Then what you can see is, again, it's kind of increasing the that sort of depth of texture. Now if I duplicate that layer again, and then another thing I can do is sort of just soft light or overlay even. Now the overlay is kind of making, again, the bright's a bit too bright, the dark's a bit too dark. So what I might do is sort of take the curves and bring the shadows down a little bit. Now can I just fix that to the bottom? Yeah, just do that, so it's only fixing to that layer, something like that. And so again, what we've got here is, by using the blue channel and overlaying it and interacting it with the thing, that's kind of accentuating the texture of my face, and so as such aging it. And again, if I wanted to then take all that and put it through Camera Raw and then play around with the clarity and the texture, bring those shadows up a little bit, take the highlight down a fraction, and here we can see a very aged face, very unflattering. But it just goes to show you that, you know, there's these kind of things you can do to manipulate a face in order to make it look old. I mean, you can go the opposite way and make things look younger as well. So if I just, let's take that down a second. Tell you what, if I take those and group them together, then you can see the difference between the original and the aged is really quite substantial. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you, and that's the notion of the Liquify tool. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll just pause for a moment. So, what have we got here? Oh, Stacey says some of the adjustments are great, but might not work to expectations. Oh, that's certainly true. Now, there is another thing that I wanted to show you then, which is the notion of the Liquify tool. Now, this is where the neural filters were kind of, they were taking a blanket idea and putting it across. What I've done here with aging the face is also doing blanket ideas. But what if you want to do subtle, slight levels? So there's a whole thing here. What I will do is I'll duplicate that level now, and I'm going to go to the Liquify tool. Now, the Liquify tool does a whole bunch of different things here. I'll just move this over slightly so again you can just sort of see past and zoom. Now, what I can do is I can take I can kind of push and swirl and nudge things around if I want. What I can also do is there's other tools like the bloat tool, and what that does is I can make things one part bigger, or the opposite of that, which is the pucker tool. So I can kind of, it sort of sucks things in and makes things smaller. So, but what I want to show you here is that actually on a face, over here we've got a whole bunch of different options as well. It's got eye size, for example. So the left eye I can make bigger or smaller. So, and then the right eye, likewise, I can make smaller or bigger. So sometimes when you're working with something, now 90% of people have one eye slightly larger than the other. So for somebody who's sort of doing some kind of magazine type photo with a model and they're wanting that idea of perfection, you can kind of resize the eyes and to make sure that one balances up with the other. You don't have to have them both large. You can just have them just one slightly larger than the other. You can have eye height as well. So the top, is it slightly closed or slightly more open? Eye width. So how wide is the eye? You see that? You can go for wide eyes here. And then there's an eye tilt as well. Tilt it left or right. So I can have my eyes tilting inwards. Then there's the eye distance. So I can have them closer together or further apart. At this point I'm starting to look quite alien, I think. Fun here with the nose. Nose height. I can take my nose up or down. Let's give me a slightly longer nose maybe. Smile. Now it's not as much as inserting the teeth like the neural filter did, but if you just need to kind of slightly nudge things up or down a bit, there's the upper lip, the lower lip, kind of make those a little bit thicker, mouth wider or narrower, mouth height, up or down, but that's more kind of thickness of lips, I think, really. But then it's also got the face shape as well. Let's just pull out a little bit more. I can have my forehead up or down, and we can have chin height as well. I can smaller chin, longer chin, jawline. I can go for a wider or a narrower jaw, something like that, and even my whole face width. I can make it wider or narrower. So we can now go from that to that, if we think that's going to improve things. And then if I wanted, I could, let's Control J that again, and let's go back to the Liquify tool. And then what I will do is, if I decide to go for that bloat tool and make the eye even bigger, like that, I'll go for the pucker tool, make the nose thinner. I can then take this push tool and just kind of stretch down the chin. I can narrow it down and I can give myself pointy ears, something like that. And then if I actually, what I might just do, let's just kind of nudge the cheekbones in a bit. So if I just, or the jawline, so I can kind of do something like that. And now we've got myself going kind of really quite alien, I think. And if that, at that point, if we're going alien, we may as well change my skin color. So if I go to hue saturation, and then let's select the reds. So I think, and move this over, we can go blue, or I suppose really aliens tend to be green is what we tend to think of, or, so let's give myself a sort of slight green hint there. And so we can where did we go? I missed something here. Yep. So we can go from that to that, or there was the neural filter, or there was the aging thing where we were doing that. So really, as you can see, that there's lots of different fun you can have with Photoshop, and that's kind of what I wanted to show you. So that whole thing then of when people talk about photoshopping someone and what you see in magazines doesn't necessarily reflect reality. That it's not just that. Now, what I've done is I've exaggerated all these things to show you, but lots of times these things are done very subtly. Like I say, they maybe just sort of even out somebody's eyes. They'll just soften out a little bit of skin. They'll just sort of balance out somebody's earlobe. They'll reshape somebody's jaw or lengthen their neck a little bit. So all these little subtle bits until in the end, the person that you're looking at on the magazine doesn't in fact actually end up looking very much like the original person at all. So never believe what you see. The idea the camera never lies, forget it. The camera never tells the truth, and certainly once you get into the editing process, it removes it even further. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I think as long as it's fun and you know what you're doing and you want to create a particular look, then that's okay. And I've had so much fun with grandchildren and nephews and nieces over the years, turning them into elves and goblins and what have you. And that's okay. Where the problem comes is when you start believing that these bits of perfection, these idealized people we see around us all the time, that's what everybody naturally looks like. They don't. They only look like that because they've had work done, sometimes with plastic surgery, but they nearly all have work done via the editing software. Right, okay. Couple of comments here. Pap says the original photo is a really nice one of you. Yeah, it was also 4 years old. Meg says you're making me laugh just now. That's good. I'm pretty good about that. May Britt says how funny. I just tried with a model face, but I do not think that she would like it. This is true. And VG says a person's look can be changed drastically. Absolutely, it can. So, hope you found that interesting. Hope that you found that a little bit of fun. Just a quick reminder that if you do find these podcasts useful, interesting, fun, entertaining, and you would like to support them at all, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do this. You can buy me 2 or buy me 5. Keep me fed in coffees for the next year. Entirely up to you. Right. Okay. Now, what I decided to do, to follow on from this then, I did the question of the week. And the question of the week I decided to tackle, kind of tying in with this because I knew we were going to be talking about it, was I said, do you prefer to have an up-to-date profile image on your social media, or one from a few years ago that is edited to make you look younger, or maybe, sorry, one from a few years ago, or one that has been edited to make you look younger? Or do you have something which isn't you at all, like a plant or a pet or a landscape or something like that? Because when we go onto social media, when we go onto Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn, you often see pictures of people, or you don't see pictures of people, or you see pictures of people and that's not really the person you met. So I thought, well, let's have a little kind of talk about this. And so I put that question up and I got quite a few different responses to it, which I thought each of them are quite interesting and reflect something of not just the personality of the person who's talking about it, but of essentially the attitude to whole swathes of humanity, really. We all have slightly different ideas, and we can all either fully understand or even get upset at the way somebody else chooses to present themselves to the public. Because the strange thing is about social media is there is this place to have an avatar. That little avatar, that little bit which is usually the self-portrait, is there to represent you, how you wish to be seen, represented on the internet. And different people have different ways of going about it. Now, as a portrait, I've talked before quite often that as a portrait photographer, one of the things I'm very aware of is most people hate having their photo taken. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, which I've talked at in depth before. From your face being the wrong way around because you're used to your mirror image, through to your personal mental image. You still tend to think of yourself as 22, but there's this 60-something staring you back on the camera and you don't like it. There's all sorts of things. But so what I did was I kind of, to tell you some of the answers here, because about half a dozen people put in some interesting comments and nearly all of them were different. So May Britt says, I like to have an updated profile picture on my social media. Now, May Britt didn't go into say much more about why, but she talked about the fact that she does. And I will say that I do too. Generally speaking, I don't like it if my profile picture gets too far out of date. And part of that, for me, is the fact that I am out there meeting people all the time. And one of the problems that you have is if your profile picture is too far different from how you look in reality, then if you're meeting up with somebody for, you're meeting for a coffee, or you're meeting them for the first time, you're going to be having a business meeting with somebody, then they might not even recognize you when you go to meet up. Now, Chrissy said, I always keep my profile picture up to date, and I'm a bit suspicious of profiles that don't have a photo. So now I don't know Chrissy's background, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Chrissy, again, is in a kind of business level whereby she meets people. Now, it maybe varies from social media to social media, but one of the things I've noticed a lot is LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn is a business social media platform. And whenever I've been in a business setting and I'm going to be meeting someone, the first thing I do is I'll go and check to see if they have a LinkedIn profile so that I know who it is that I'm going to be meeting. And if I go to their profile and it's a picture of a plant or their dog or a landscape, then I don't know who it is I'm supposed to be meeting up with. And that's just, to me, is wrong. The point of having a picture there is that when somebody meets, it's not about whether you like your own image as such. It's about whether you're going to be recognized if somebody's going to be meeting up with you. Now, obviously, we want to have the better version of ourselves. We want to have the bit where we've combed our hair and, whether had a shave or, wearing a suit or something like that. But I think you still need to have something which reasonably reflects who you're going to be meeting. So now Naria, by contrast, says mine are normally random photos I've taken of flowers, sunsets, animals, but never myself, as this is the way I want to choose who I add to my friends list. So for Chrissy, it's all about making sure you have a picture that looks like you. And for Nuria, it's about making sure she doesn't have a picture so she can't be recognised. Now, again, there's a whole bunch of reasons why somebody might be, there's plenty of people who want a level of privacy who don't necessarily want somebody to be able to recognise them on the street. So you end up with this kind of idea that there's a difference in attitude coming when you're placing something up on social media. Jackie said, I prefer to see an image of a person in their profile so you can put a face to the name. And again, I think that's a certain amount of truth in that. I mean, I like that. When I'm chatting to somebody, especially when we chat, it's like here, I've got a bunch of names here, but it's so much nicer when I can visualize somebody that I'm talking to. So because for example, I've done Zoom calls with Fiji before now. I know what VG looks like, and VG usually has a picture of what she looks like on her avatar as well. So when I'm talking to VG, even if it's just typing, I've got a picture of her in my face. Similarly with Robert, and I like that. I like that being able to. It just kind of helps. Whereas people I've not met before, without having a picture in my head, it always feels slightly more awkward, I think. But then that is, like I said, but that's me. Other people react in different ways. And Jackie goes on to say, which reminds me I need to update my profile image, which is already a few years old. Becca said, I'm terrible at updating mine, as they're always there for a few years before I get around to taking a new one. And that's fair enough. We quite often I get a bit lazy or just forget, to be honest. Claire said, I'm all over the place. Sometimes current me, sometimes me when I was little, sometimes skinny me, sometimes on my artwork, sometimes flowers, sometimes seasonal, sometimes avatars, wherever the mood takes me. And I think that's fair enough. And I think on things like Facebook and what have you, you can have a bit of fun with that. If you're kind of quite frequently updating your profile picture, then I think you may as well have a bit of fun. Why not? And April says, I prefer when I was younger for sure, but the small tiny circle picture of my currently is all I can handle. My Facebook profile is when I got married and I was in my 20s. There is no way I would put up a larger picture of me there currently. And to a certain extent, that makes me feel sad. Why wouldn't you want to put a picture of yourself up there now, as you are now? You are who you are now. Now, obviously, I know me saying that, if you are feeling intensely self-conscious about how you look, some bloke off the internet saying, hey, you shouldn't be, you're fine as you are, isn't really going to make much difference. But it is one of those things that kind of strikes me. And another reason for, okay, go off slight tangent here. One of the things I'm very aware of is when we meet people, what happens is we automatically, our brain overlays our idea of what they looked like the last time we met them with how they look now. So if, sometimes, if the beard has been growing out a bit and then I have a shave, and occasionally somebody notices that from last week to this week, my beard is suddenly shorter. If you met me and I changed the colour of my hair, or I'd put on a lot of weight, or I'd lost a lot of weight, these are the first things you notice, because your brain is going, oh, there's a difference. Is it important that I notice this difference? Have you become ill? Have you, oh, look what you've done to your hair. Isn't that nice? Or whatever. So with this idea that we compare to the last time we saw, now, generally speaking, most of the time, if we're meeting people daily, even if they're subtly changing, we're not going to notice. But when there's these dramatic changes, that's when we really notice. When we catch up with somebody after a few years, it's like you go to a school reunion and the first thing you're aware of is just how old everybody looks. Because in your head, they're still 16 when you're at school and suddenly they're 56 and, looking like old people. And that's not how you remember them. And you're convinced you don't look anything like as old as they do until you look in the mirror and you realise, of course, you're the same age as them. And then, but to come back to then this idea of your avatar, if people get used to seeing your avatar, and your avatar is one of you when you were 20 years younger, when they meet you, the first thing they're going to think is that you look 20 years older than you actually do, because they're comparing you to when they last saw you, which was on social media. And I always think this is a real problem. People love putting up these photos of themselves when they were younger. Now, like I said, I think it's different if you're constantly changing your avatar. That's okay. But if you're still sticking with this avatar of you from 20 years ago, then when people meet you face to face, the first thing they're going to do is think how old you look. Now, one of the things I started doing from realizing this was very often when I'm creating my avatar for social media, actually, I do push the sliders on the clarity and the texture a little bit and slightly age myself. And since I started doing that, I've noticed every time I meet people in the flesh, the first thing I do that tends to happen is I get complimented on how good I look, because basically I don't look quite as old and craggy in real life as I do on my pictures. So if you want more compliments, don't stick up the picture of you from 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Actually, age yourself and put up a worse photo of yourself so that you look better in real life. Now, I keep telling all my clients this, but very few of them ever let me age them in Photoshop. I see Pat here says, I shamelessly use photos from the past. Lots were taken by pros, and at 92 I look like an old lady, which is ridiculous. Well, again, Pat, I mean, this is different. I mean, Pat, I know, was a model, and actually, 50, 60 years ago. And has some fantastic photos from back then, and as you say, were taken by some pretty amazing photographers too. So why not use them? Why not have a bit of fun? But if we only ever saw those photos of you when you were 25, and then we were to meet you when you're 92, it would come as a shock to all of us. However, I have met Pat in real life a few times, and she does look considerably younger than the 92 that she is. So, however, she doesn't look 22. Sorry to say, Pat. But hopefully you kind of get what I mean about this, which is, I would say, you try and embrace who you are, and because when other people meet you, they might make an instant judgment on, but then that judgment disappears quite straightforward. When you meet somebody, if the first thing you notice about them is they've got a very big nose or they've got bright red hair, you notice these things because these are identity markers, so that next time you meet them, you will recognise them. And whilst the first time you meet them, that becomes kind of part of how you are going to identify them, after a while, it stops being how you identify. You get to know a person much more because of their personality, and you decide whether you like them or not by how they treat you, by how you interact with them. And that becomes infinitely more important than how big they are, how bald they are, how old they are, what the colour of their skin is, what the size of their nose is. These things all mean less and less and less the more you get to know someone. So I do tend to feel kind of put your face out there, let people get past that bit, and then they can get to know you and your personality. So there we go. That's the whole kind of psychological bit going on there. So thank you to everybody who responded to that. I thought it kind of opened up a fairly interesting kind of line of thought and philosophy and conversation. Excuse me. Okay. So now what we're going to do is move on to the critique section. Now, rather surprisingly, I've only had one entry. Robert's the only one who's actually sent me in a picture for critique. Now, I noticed earlier, Binod has said, sent me an email. Now, this thing is about critique is if you are wanting me to do critique, you have to get it in early, ideally by the Friday, Saturday at the very latest, because otherwise I don't have time to really look through and work out, because I don't just do these things completely off the top of my head. To try and make sure the critique is as good as it can be, I do like to have a bit of time to look at the picture beforehand and work out how I'm best going to respond to be able to help you. So keep that in mind for when you're sending me images that you would like critiqued. The other thing I will say quickly, and I'll remind you again afterwards, is that I'm not around next week. I'm heading down to Devon for a week, so there won't be a podcast next week, but there will again be in 2 weeks' time, and there will be a critique section in 2 weeks' time. So if you want a picture critiqued for that, make sure you get that into me within the next 2 weeks. And it will, as always, there's a kind of first come, first serve basis. If there's more than about 4 or 5, that will get rolled over to future weeks. Okay, so critique then. Let's take a little look at the picture Robert sent me. So Robert sent me this one in, and he said, I took this picture of a train in Washington's DC Metro this week. It's a long exposure, and I'd like your feedback on it. I should have changed the original exposure from default to tungsten from sunlight. I tried correcting it with temperature in Photoshop. As always, thank you for your help. So this is Robert's edited photo, but Robert did also send me the original photo. So just while the raw one opens, you still get right. So this is his original photo. So now what he's talking about here is the white balance. He had it set for sunshine, and sunshine tends to kind of, where daylight will give you a slight yellow shift in your white balance as it's counteracting sort of blue of the sky and all the rest of it. It tends to kind of give everything a slight yellow shift. Now that's all very fine, but then if you go into the underground and certain kinds of lighting, it tends to make everything look intensely yellow. So you need to kind of rebalance. So I'll tell you what, so let's just open that and let's close that one. We don't need that one anymore. And I'll tell you what, let's just open Robert's this one as well, just so we can kind of see what he's done to it. And so first off, I would say, Robert, I mean, I think you've done quite a lot with the colour here. It works particularly well. I also really like the idea that you've gone and you set up your camera, you set it up to create, you know, to do a long exposure, to do a few seconds long. We've got an ISO 50, which is really good, and that's meant that the quality is there. Even though you've been sort of playing around with it, we're not getting too much noise when we come in, and that's great. So that means the quality is there. Because one of the problems we've had before, Robert, is where you know, like when we were talking about that one that you took inside the building a couple of weeks ago, it was a very noisy picture. This one isn't. This is really good quality on it. So we go back to here, and as we can see, the problem is that it's kind of bright yellow. Now there's a couple of different things we can do with this. If I duplicate that, now I might decide to just sort of go auto color and see what that does. Now that's kind of shifted a little bit, but not very much. So I think what I might do is I'll go back to camera raw filter with this, and basically you've got temperatures here. If we do auto, that's shifted a little bit. Or we can do things where we can just slide that over. We can, and the more blue we take, you know, we can go right over and make it really quite blue. Or we can kind of, it's kind of making it fairly neutral though. We're kind of losing, we've not got a lot of colour in there. Now you can nudge the vibrance up a little bit maybe and kind of create a little bit more contrast with it, a little bit of saturation. So it's a kind of a tricky one where you're kind of looking to balance out different colours. But that looks kind of more natural than that. But Robert's gone further with this, and he's kind of boosted more blues and things like that. And you know, you can do that as well. I mean, if I wanted, I could make that even bluer. Let's go back into here again for a sec, and drag that further over into the blues. Now maybe that's too blue, so maybe what I want to do is I could sort of selectively mask it and just kind of paint out. Let's change that. Kind of keep the yellows, from the original, something like that. And now we end up with a very kind of, maybe you even want to keep it completely like this and just have the blue where the streak of the train is going past on the left, something like that. So there's ways you can play with that, or if we stick that back in, that kind of, or we could blend 3, not that, sorry, go to there, mask that out, and then say maybe mask, unmask that back in, and just kind of create a slightly more neutral part here. So we've got maybe the yellow of the roof, the blue of the train. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can play with this. I quite like Robert's mix. He's played around with this for a while. What I would say, it looks a little bit dark. Now the other thing I will say with this is it also looks slightly tilted. This is back to whether it, I don't know with my OCD, but the horizon just doesn't quite feel straight. I just want to tilt it a fraction. There we go. That just feels more comfortable. Yeah, absolutely. I like that now. So if having straightened that, if I go to filter camera raw here, I feel your blues are maybe just over punched a little bit, but I quite like the other blues that you've got in here. But it does feel like it needs lightening up a bit. And I think just if we up the exposure a bit, or not the whites, yeah, let's just nudge the exposure up a little bit and kind of make it a bit more light and airy. You could, if you want, nudge the clarity a bit. That's maybe overcooking it a little bit. Contrast kind of becomes slightly interesting, makes it bolder. Does take the colours up a little bit. So I don't know whether maybe the vibrance is a bit too strong. Take that down. Of course, if you do that, you lose too much. But I think something like that, if you just nudge down slightly, becomes quite interesting. So having it brighter, a little bit more contrasty maybe, and now we're really kind of making the most of, you've got these brilliant lines. I really love the way all the lines are drawing you down to distance, and then you've got this, smoothed out thing here. I think it's probably also worth trying different shutter speeds as well. What would it be like if this was slightly not quite as long exposure? You might have actually got a little bit more detail coming in that we can almost see bits of window here. It may be interesting to see if there was more lines going down here, what that would have looked like. Now the other thing is there anything we could do with the crop? I noticed when you put this in Facebook, a couple of people were saying about, well, there's a little machine down here which is just coming in, could that be removed or taken out? And that's a possibility. It kind of grabs the attention a little bit without really delivering too much. Another thing here is actually you could kind of even go a bit more cinematic. I think if you sort of take this up, we've talked before about the idea of the diagonal lines tend to work really well when they go into a corner. Now this goes into a corner, but over on the left here it doesn't so much. If you were to take this up to here, now then at this point this line comes down into this corner, and this line of the barrier comes down into this corner. And because we've now got that straight, I mean, it's a banner shot now, more, but it's quite cinematic. I mean, almost Stanley Kubrick, I think. There's a... and I must admit, I really quite like that to it. So really, Robert, I mean, I'm kind of playing at the edges here. I think what you've done is you've created something. I really love the fact that you've gone out and tried this. That you found a place that you've really gone for. There's a lot of thought going on where you've stood, so that you are looking right down the middle of it. So you're creating a symmetry, which by its nature, because of the train going on one side, gives you that asymmetrical symmetry that we've talked about before. That symmetry, but not quite, which I think really works really well, is the use of the diagonals, the use of leading lines, all drawing you down straight into the picture, makes for a really powerful composition. I also like the way that you've adjusted the colours. I do tend to feel that I still feel these blues over here just do feel slightly overcooked on that, and I would maybe just tone them. You know, the colours just, yeah. I mean, you know, over here you can see it, I just feel slightly oversaturated on that. But you know, that's, you know, very subtle adjustments you could do with that. And again, well, okay, let's just show you. If I go to hue saturation, no, that's color balance. That's not the one I wanted. Where are we? There, and I go to the blues and just we desaturate a little bit. You see, takes that down. You don't need to remove it completely, but just nudge down a fraction. Just kind of take the edge off. There we go. So something like that, I think. So you can see from the signpost here, it's that. And I think that just makes it look fractionally more natural. Doesn't tend to kind of scream at you quite as much. Something like that, I think. But you're pretty much there. Like, just that straightening bit, it wasn't quite there. I mean, it's literally half a degree or something like that, possibly less. But you need to play around with that, because something like this, because it's all about the lines, I think making sure you've got that absolutely flat horizon becomes super important. But I do like the way that you've done the colour adjustments to that. Like I said, slightly oversaturated blues, but beyond that, I really like that kind of that. And the other thing was to lighten it up a bit. But the core of what you got was really good. For me, it was just a case of straightening it, lightening it, taking the blues down a little bit. And like I say, probably for my money, I quite like this crop here. Although this works better on the computer, on a larger screen, I don't whether it will work quite so well on a photo crowd or Guru Shots type setting. I'm not so sure, but I still think there's something quite kind of, yeah, Stanley Kubrick 2001 space agey kind of about this, which I think could quite appeal quite well. So I hope that that helps there, Robert. Gives you a little bit of information. So what have we got? A couple of comments here. Oh, Stacey was saying her profile picture is pretty current. Meg Britt says it's gold coloured. I would have kept that colour, so she quite likes the gold. Meg says really interesting photo, Robert. Robert says thanks. I should have known that it was askew. And Fiji says lovely photo, draws you in. Right, okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of all the bits and pieces. So just to remind you then that next week there won't be a podcast. I'm heading down to Devon, going to be catching up with my brother and sister, which is going to be quite fun, taking Meg with me. Maggie's going off on a workshop, an art workshop, so we're essentially dropping her off, and then Meg and I are heading off to Devon to meet my brother and sister. And with luck, we're also hoping to pop in and see Pat as well. But we are going to all be doing our testing for COVID and everything first, just to double check. Don't want to take anything nasty along. But what that means, like I say, is the fact that there won't. So episode 115 will be in 2 weeks' time. Now, at that point, I'm hoping I will be able to show you the ultimate selfie. So photo I did a few months ago, but I've not had the chance to put it out there in the public yet. And if everything goes according to plan within the next week, that will be going out into the public domain, and then I'll be able to talk much more about that. Likewise, yes, like I say, there will be a critique section, and so make the most of the critique section. I was quite surprised that Robert was the only one who sent something in. There's so few places on the internet where you can really get reasonable feedback on your images, and this is one of the few places. And as you can see, I think I was quite kind to Robert. I don't think I was nasty or anything like that, so you're in safe hands. Or Robert even says it helps a lot. I will play around with the crop and colours some more. So there we go. Make sure you get your stuff in for critique. Okay, sorry, I see Rosemary's just put something in. All right, she's saying have a wonderful visit and workshop, and Jackie's also saying thanks a lot. So cool. Right, let me do that, and yep, set that up ready. So I will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Meanwhile, stick your pictures in for critique, and we have the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Stick images in, get the chat going, and let's keep having fun. And don't forget to invite your friends along. Let's get a few more people along to these podcasts. Take care, and I'll see you all in a fortnight. Cheerio.